Hey, what's going on, youth pastors? Got another video, some content, some cool topics for us to discuss and get into. I never know how to start these videos, and I don't know why it's always awkward, but it is. But we're going to get into it. Two things real quick before we get into the video. One is, in case you are looking to make content for your youth ministry, whether it's your students that are like, we need to make TikToks, or you want to make content that's just high quality, maybe it's training videos or something to kind of replicate something like this, whatever it might be. I'm going to put some links in the description of some of the different things that I use to help you out with any sort of content making that you want to do within your youth ministry. So things like this boom arm, my mic, the lights I have, little things like that. And the best part is all of it's cheap because I'm not rich. So all the stuff is super affordable, and you can take a look at things and get an idea for some content. And as well, I'd love it if in the comments you drop a comment of some topics and some various things that maybe you're interested in hearing talk about. So I have a bunch of ideas of things I want to talk about, but I make these videos for you guys and for whoever happens to watch these. So if there's topics that you want to get into, feel free to drop some comments on that sort of stuff. Let's get into some content today. I actually, as I'm going through my notes, this might actually be a longer video. This might be 20 plus minutes. I don't know. So we'll find out whenever we finish this. So hard conversations. How do you effectively have difficult conversations, hard conversations, corrective conversations, however you want to word it? How do you have those difficult conversations with your team members, with other people, with students maybe? The list goes on and on of whoever you're going to have those conversations with. And here's why I think this topic is actually vitally important. I would suggest this, that not being able to have effective, hard conversations with people basically becomes a lid for you. If you can't have good, effective, meaningful, difficult conversations with people, it's going to become a lid. It's going to lid and create I don't know if it's a stumbling block, but whatever, you get the idea. It's going to create an inability for you to push past some things in your leadership, not just as a youth pastor, but in your pastoral leadership, in your organizational leadership. It's going to create a lid for you. So I think this is one of those skills that's absolutely vital if you want to lead well. If you want to lead teams well, you have to be able to navigate hard conversations and do them well. So why are hard conversations hard in the first place? And realistically, you could come up with, a long list of a dozen reasons or so. I would suggest the two big reasons why usually is because, one, we don't like hurting people's feelings. And that's kind of just, it happens with hard conversations when you have to correct somebody on something that they did or didn't do or how they went about something. A lot of times it just hurts our feelings and it's not fun. No one enjoys it. And so we don't like hurting people's feelings. And so it kind of makes us hesitant about having hard conversations because we just don't want to hurt people's feelings. And then also you're just not guaranteed the outcome of it. You just kind of have no idea how they're going to respond to that conversation. And that's what makes it kind of, I think, extra scary and extra like, I don't know if I want to do this, because they could take it really well and they could be great about correction and like, hey, you're right, I'm going to improve on this. Or they could just shut off and like take it and just kind of stay silent, or they could just blow up and go crazy and start a bunch of drama behind your back, whatever it's going to be. So it totally varies unless you've been around somebody for like years and years and years and you've had conversations with them. You kind of just don't know how they're going to respond. And I think that's kind of the key reason why we just don't like hard conversations, because we just can't predict the outcome. So even though we can't predict the outcome, and even though we can't know for sure how people are going to respond, there's some things that you can do as the leader, as the one initiating these conversations, to alleviate all of that stuff. Of course, there's always going to be the variable that you can't control, but at the very least, you can do your best to minimize that or to erase them. So if you do a few things and think a little bit on the front end, I think you eliminate the majority of the possibility that that conversation goes bad. So I'm going to give you basically 4 tips, but 2 things leading into it. So I don't know how I'm going to structure this, but this is just sort of how we're going to roll with it. So First off is this: do not wait. Do not wait to have that conversation. Very likely, the moment that you have the thought of, this leader, they said this, they did this, or maybe they aren't doing this, or whatever it is, as soon as you have the thought of, I probably need to have a conversation with them, very likely it's already at the point that you need to have the conversation. And usually what happens is you're like, I probably need to have this conversation with this person, but I'm going to wait a few more days, few more weeks, and see if the problem persists, and then see if I need to have the conversation with that person. Well, if you're having that thought of I need to have the conversation, probably you've already made your way through that point, and now is the time when you don't need further evidence. You just need to go and have the conversation with the person. Now, yeah, of course, there's always going to be scenarios where, yes, you need to wait, or maybe it's a one-off thing. Sure, yeah, that totally happens, but I would probably venture to say most of the time, by the time you think of it, it's already time to have the conversation. And if you're like me, probably as soon as you have that thought of, I need to have this conversation with this person, you think I'm going to wait a few weeks because you just don't want to have the conversation with them because it's awkward and you just I just don't want to because it's hard, it's difficult, and no one enjoys it. And so you're probably pushing it off a few weeks to I really hope it just sorts itself out, when most of the time it doesn't. And then you're left with this long string of extra little things. So as soon as you have the thought, very likely, of course not always, but likely it's already at the point of don't wait, just have the conversation with the person. But kind of in that, I need to wait, is oftentimes we like to wait for the perfect time. And the reality is there's often never the perfect time to have the conversation. So you kind of just sort of have to pick a time and just do it. Sometimes it's really easy and it's just a quick little tweak and fix, and it's just quickly on a Wednesday. Sometimes it is much more of a serious thing of a consistent maybe attribute that the person keeps doing, or they're really falling behind, or really not meeting up with something, whatever it is. There's never really a perfect time to do it. So you kind of just find a time and just do it, Now, a little side thing that I would suggest, and this is just from personal experience, I would suggest, and of course this is totally different depending on who you are, your team, your dynamics, that sort of thing, but it's get to the point. I know I keep saying, this one thing, but this and but this, but so anyways, to get to the point, is I would suggest to not be as frequent about hey, let's go grab dinner, let's go grab coffee, and use that as the time to have those conversations with the person. Because for the person on the receiving end, and I've seen this happen way too many times, is on the person on the receiving end, over time, it starts to become this thing of where, the pastor asked me to go get lunch or coffee or, whatever it is. And now it's a 50-50. Is this because they need to have a conversation with me? Is it because of something serious? Or are they just kind of hanging out with me? And I would suggest that slowly erodes away at kind of your, I don't know if credibility is the right word, but the trust that people have in you, or their willingness to engage in life with you. So as best you can, try not to use hey, let's go get dinner or coffee or something, and use that as the time to have a conversation with them. Of course, it totally depends on the person, and there's 1,000 little variables to it, but just a thought to think about. Potentially don't do that. So, because then it just creates the 50-50 of, does this mean hard conversation, or does this just mean hang out and talk about football or something like that? So that's a little side note there. So as you get into the conversation, as I mentioned earlier, there's a few, obviously you don't know the outcome, you don't know how people are going to respond, but there's a few things that you can do to alleviate the possibility that the outcome goes bad, or a word I thought of today is awry. How you make sure the conversation doesn't go bad. So I'm going to give you 4 things, and they're pretty simple and easy, but if you do these and think about them a little bit, it'll help you a whole lot in your conversation. So first off is think through what you want to say. Especially if the conversation is much more on the this is a really big deal and this really needs to be corrected. Think through what you want to talk about. Think through how you want to word things, because what is so vital, and this is probably the one thing that'll determine the trajectory of this conversation, is it is vital. I mean, super vital that you both bring grace and truth to the conversation. If you are just gracious, then you beat around the bush and the person you're having the conversation with doesn't really honestly get what you're trying to get at and what's supposed to be corrected. They just see this as like maybe a mild, like, hey, just, think about X, Y, or Z and, whatever. And it's really vague. That makes really ineffective conversations. But if you come in with way too much truth, then you probably very likely set yourself up for a really long and bad conversation. But you have to marry the two, grace and truth. I always, especially if it's a much more difficult conversation, I spend a good day or so, just like periodically through the day, thinking of how do I want to word this in a way that is both gracious and truthful, because I need to be direct, but I need to be kind at the same time. I can't just beat around the bush of whatever the thing is. Again, especially if it's a much more serious conversation, I can't just beat around the bush, but I can't be so direct that I'm just like, you suck and this thing's horrible, never do this again, because people just don't like hearing that. There's a way to be gracious and truthful at the same time. There's a way to be direct and kind at the same time. So think about the way you want to word this, how you want to approach the conversation so that you find a good balance between being gracious with them, but also being direct, kind, and truthful with them. So that's the first thing going into the conversation. Then you get to the conversation. Here's kind of what I do is just pull someone aside like, hey, can we chat really quick? And go off to a kind of a private space. And I think it's a great idea just up front to like, hey, really quick, a few things we need to correct here, and just be upfront right away. And again, think of how you want to word that, how you want to phrase it, so that way it's gracious and truthful at the same time. So something like, hey, we need to chat this thing really quick. Here's some adjustments we need to make, or something like that. That's an example. So be upfront. And then as you lead into the conversation, then this is it's funny. I told this very thing to our leaders and our student leaders one day, and now they use this on me all the time as a joke, is thing I like to call the compliment sandwich. So you start the conversation off with like, hey, here we need to have this chat. And then you get into it. And the first things I like to do is I like to compliment them of like, hey, you as maybe it's a leader that you need to correct. Your involvement here is super valuable. We love having you. You make a difference with the student. And the way my students always word it now is they're like, Pastor Ryan, you're great, but, and they use that as a joke on me now. So I don't know why they remember that so well, but they did. And so essentially you start off with something nice about them, encourage them, compliment them, that sort of thing. And then you get into what you need to talk about. And again, this kind of goes back to the first thing is think through how you want to word this part. Get through the thing that you need to correct with them or about them, whatever it is. And then you end it with, again, like, hey, even though this is a problem and this is a thing that needs to be fixed, we still love you. We still value you. You're still part of the team. We still love having you, X, Y, or Z, whatever it's going to be. Obviously, it's going to be case by case, but start up being upfront with them about what the conversation's about. You encourage them, give life into them, correct them about the thing, and then end with, again, more encouragement and life-giving stuff. And then kind of as well as sort of a fourth thing to kind of loop in there somewhere is I always like to leave my leaders or whoever it is that I'm correcting, I like to leave them with an actionable step. So maybe it's something like, hey, you do the service welcome and announcements. You miss all these details. We need these details in there, whatever it is. So when we do the announcements, think of them ahead. Make sure you chat with me about what the details are, confirm them, write them in your notes, whatever it is. But I give them an actionable step to make sure that we're both clear about what needs to be corrected and then how they can go about correcting it. And then obviously from there, it's up to them to correct it and then that sort of thing. So those are a few steps and a few things that you can do to kind of alleviate bad conversations, I don't know why I said bad, but like hard conversations, how you can alleviate kind of the potential fall off from it. And then a last little kind of a bonus thing for you, and I've kind of mentioned this a few times through this video, is sometimes what can help with these conversations is to not just call them, I need to have a hard conversation with somebody, but you can rephrase it like a corrective conversation or a developmental conversation with somebody, and it kind of alleviates the like the perception of the difficultyness of it, of like, hey, we need to have a hard conversation, that just sounds really abrasive and really like, ooh, I don't want to have that conversation with you, even if it's going to help. I just don't want to. But if it's a, hey, let's have a developmental conversation, it just sounds nicer. And it's kind of what you're doing. You're developing the person or you're correcting them. So maybe consider thinking about rewording how you talk about these conversations of like, hey, let's have a developmental conversation versus let's have a hard conversation. And sometimes that can alleviate some of that stuff as well, or an adjustment conversation, however you want to word it, But sometimes those wording things can help kind of remove stipulation and remove like the perception of a thing, of what it's going to be and how it's going to be. So, yeah, that's a fun little bonus tip for you. So, again, just to reiterate from the very beginning, I'm going to link some things in the description, not the comments, the description of some of this equipment in case you want to up the quality of your videos and maybe, that sort of thing. And then as well, I'd love for you to drop comments down below of various topics that you'd like to get covered, or maybe some things that you're like, hey, want help with this? What are some advice? Things like that. So I'm here to help and provide things for youth pastors. That's the whole point of doing this. So thanks for watching. Appreciate you being here. Have a great day. And yeah, peace.